It's very hard to put into words the impact that a sponsor can have on a network until you actually see it. Until you actually see it done well, then it's an absolute game changer. And, it was a reminder to me at this summit how important it is to have the right sponsor. So if maybe you are struggling with a sponsor, or you're at the point of maybe choosing a new sponsor, or putting in a request for a new sponsor, then this clearly is surely is the video for you. So this is ERG Strategy, the channel that gives you tips, tools, help, advice, techniques to sustain and maintain engaged, effective employee resource groups that really make a difference and have an impact in your organization. So if that's what you are interested in, you're in the right place. New videos every week. And I go live every Friday morning on LinkedIn at 8:30 UK time. So this final case study, so if you've watched the previous two, this is the third in a series of me sharing the lessons from the case studies at the ERG Leader Summit in London. This case study is going to be about the impact from the co-op and a brilliant initiative that they kicked off. But here's the thing, the lesson that I wasn't expecting on the day was around what makes a good sponsor. And I'm struggling to even put it into words, right? But it's the impact that having a good sponsor has on the effectiveness. It's like it 10x's, it really amplifies the impact that a network can have. And we saw it we literally saw it and we heard it live in the room. And so I thought actually that is, probably one of the stronger lessons that I want to focus on. But what I'm going to do with this time then, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the case study itself. And then I'm going to talk about the sponsor, how you can find that right sponsor, and how much of a difference it can make. So basically, the reason that I'm sharing these case studies is I'm conscious that not everybody, made it to London. Some of you are in different countries. Some of you just physically can't get there. Some of you have got budget constraints. Although, as I always say, there are always elements of the summit that are free, right? Whether it's just the networking, or I think this year, because we didn't have the venue until quite late, we actually invited people to come along to the fireside chat for free. Right, so there is always going to be an element of the summit that will be free where you have budget constraints, and then we always do reductions for charities, public sector, all of that kind of thing. But we're trying to make more of it accessible. So the fireside chat, if it's not out already on a video, that is going to be released as a whole video for free on this here YouTube channel, so that you can enjoy that fireside chat. And in future summits, I'm going to try to do more of that, recording things like these case studies, etc., so that people can, talk about them afterwards and dissect them and still get the learnings, basically. So this final case study was from Co-op, and it was their Represent network, which is their disability and neurodiversity network. And they talked about how they implemented British Sign Language in their funeral care business to support customers that come through into that part of the business that need support, obviously, with the loss of, for example, a loved one, and they need BSL interpreters. And it's a really incredible story. I know many of you will have heard me tell the story of how I first became aware of it when I was doing some training with Co-op. Was it last year or the year before? I can't even remember. But I met an individual, one of the members of the network, who themselves is deaf, but they can lip read, talking about their experience of, loss and, dealing with funeral services, etc. When somebody is deaf and maybe they can't lip read, and so the importance of BSL interpretation. So that was what the case study was around, and the team that were there explained, how it came about. Now, here's the thing. So for each of the case studies that were handpicked, and they were handpicked because actually it's really hard to find ERGs that are doing things at this kind of level, right? Impact at this level where they're impacting not only colleagues, but it's out to customers and all the wider community. And I don't mean in a charitable way, because lots of ERGs are doing charitable stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's not many that get involved in product and service improvement that benefit customers. That for me is really like one of the sweet spots, you know, the holy grail. And so when I was looking for these case studies, I said to the individuals, you know, when you come to present your case study, it'd be great if you can come along with your sponsor. You know, I want your sponsor to come as well so that we can hear it from their perspective. So the sponsor came from Co-op, and they were the only sponsor that came along to present. They weren't the only sponsor in the room, but they were the only sponsor that came along to present. Their group chief technology officer, whose role I want to say is slightly different, but I can't remember it. But to all intents and purposes, the CTO, very humble guy, you know, so when the co-chairs were presenting, was really sort of hanging back, wasn't really wanting to take the limelight, was just wanting to give them the voice, which was lovely. That was lovely just to see that dynamic about sponsors, you know, making sure that they don't take the limelight and give the voice to the co-chairs, I think was really great to see, actually. Very engaged, and you know, a few people have commented on this, very engaged from the moment they walked into the room. You know, they kind of like stayed with the group, had lunch, you know, got involved in table discussions, and then did the presentation. And so you know, the co-chairs presented what had happened, etc. They then came, I'm going to say, I think it was to the last slide, about the importance of technology actually in terms of enabling accessibility for a network like this, and that in itself actually raised some really interesting lessons, I think, for any networks that are disability and neurodivergence. The importance of somebody in your technology organization being involved in and or committed to your network, because it really can unlock things. Anyway, so the sponsor, you know, started talking about his involvement. I can't remember how we got into it, but he started explaining why he was so passionate about the work and why he was so happy to be a sponsor. And he shared a story about a colleague of his many years ago who had a child with a disability, and the impact that had on him. Now, this is many years before he starts working for this organisation, right? This is over 10 years ago. So he's working with a colleague, sees the challenges that it creates having a child with a disability, actually starts getting involved in some fundraising as well for that particular individual and or that particular disability as well, that condition. And that just really lights a fire. You know, it just you could see it, like it lit a fire of passion and motivation for that as a cause. So when, you know, he's now at Co-op, he's now the CTO, and you know, I guess that this opportunity presents itself to become a sponsor, he absolutely jumps at it, and the difference that he makes is incredible, and we could all hear it and see it in the room. And so, and one of the things that he said, just before I get on to the lessons, he talked about, you know, when we had this issue about X, you know, in terms of accessibility and the technology, and I'll just like, we'll just throw a few developers at it. That there for me is, okay, when you've got a sponsor that is maybe they're slightly more operational, or they're involved in an area of the business that is about getting things done, they have the formal positional power to be able to say, oh, I'll just throw some resources at it. We'll just throw this resource at it. Or maybe having a conversation with another exec or director that says, can we just get some resources on that? This is the power of when you've got the right sponsor. When you've got the right sponsor, and also the motivation of the sponsor. Now, there's a framework that I sometimes use when I'm talking to network leaders about how to get buy-in with senior leaders. I talk about a framework called the 3Ms, not my framework, it's called the 3Ms: mindset, method, and motivation. And I'm kind of like, you have to get all three of those lined up to get that real support. So mindset, do they believe in what you're doing? Like, are their values kind of like aligned? And values in terms of what they believe consciously, but also subconsciously, you know, or are there any blockers that you're not aware of? So mindset is really important to getting them lined up. Method, do they know what to do? Do they know the exact steps to take in order to be effective sponsors, right? Have you made it really crystal clear? And the third one is motivation. And what we heard in that room with this particular sponsor, we heard all three, like all three were lined up. The mindset, they totally got it in terms of why it was important. The method, they knew exactly what to do, and actually, and they could see also where the barriers were. So this wasn't like an unrealistic, not being aware of any of the business priorities and resource constraints and all that, because they talked about potentially some of the constraints. And then the motivation, which I think was probably the bigger one that had actually then driven the first two. So that personal story of seeing that up close and personal was the motivation that they needed to support that network. The other thing as well, that motivation, for some people, the motivation is their own lived experience. So there's often this question around whether sponsors have to have shared lived experience. I think that case there showed that they don't necessarily have to. If the motivation is there, as in maybe they've had sufficient exposure to the lived experience of the network and or sufficient knowledge and empathy of what that group is going for, that can be sufficient motivation. And so literally that's how I felt afterwards. Like my heart was full and my brain was just doing this, because I was like, oh my goodness, the lessons that I wasn't even expecting to get out of this case study by way of having a sponsor in the room who just explained that, their motivation. And then they kind of just talked, they just talked, there was no performance to it. They were just kind of like explaining why they were involved. There was zero performance, right? But it was just such a masterclass. And so this is the end of all of the case studies. But I hope, especially after this one, share this with your inclusion lead, your sponsor, your co-chair, your committee. Maybe have a conversation about whether you've got the right sponsor. And if you maybe feel that you haven't got the right sponsor, what I'm not going to suggest is that you have a conversation with them about whether they need to step down. That's not necessarily the right conversation. But think about maybe the 3 M's first, and think about what is missing and how you could potentially address which of those are missing. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can potentially do is you could look for a second sponsor. You could look for a co-sponsor that maybe already ticks some of the boxes. And I would maybe start with the motivation. So maybe try to find a co-sponsor that has that fuel and that passion, and can actually help you get things done. So maybe they do look after an operational area that that if you were to have a link into, you could be more impactful as an ERG, right? So I really hope that this video has sparked some conversation within your network. So please do feel free to share it, subscribe, etc., and let me know how you're getting on. Maybe put some of maybe what it's led to you to do within the comments here. And that's it. That's the end of all of the case studies. As I say, the final piece of video content, if it's not out already, it will be out very soon. It is going to be the fireside chat with Lush Cosmetics. The whole thing was a mic drop moment. It really was incredibly powerful. But that said, I mean, here's the thing. Even if you don't work for a Lush, there will be takeaways. And maybe I might I'll maybe top and tail that video or come out with something afterwards in terms of how you can convert some of those Lush learnings, because I know we're not all working for founder-led activist businesses. So if you're not working for a Lush, how you can potentially take away some of those learnings. But that's it for today. I hope it was really useful. If it was, please give it a thumbs up as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.